Hello, my name is Jim Milam and welcome to my shop. The subject of this meeting is sharpening. Shortly we're going to see a lot of, or several, jigs and tools and techniques and sharpening media demonstrated. But before we do that, I want to define some terminology that applies to all of this, regardless of the medium used or the jig used. So the first thing I want to do is to define a sharp edge. A sharp edge is the intersection of two polished surfaces. Now they don't have to be planes. They need to intersect at an acute angle. Obviously, two planes can intersect at a 90-degree angle and it will not be very sharp.
I got a question, Jim.
Sure.
How acute does the angle need to be?
Acute. We're going to talk about that. The term zero radius is one that you'll see in printed articles on this subject. And I think that zero radius is a good theory, but practically you can never get there. You can get very close to it. Imagine this as say a chisel. If we were sharpening this, these two surfaces intersect. On the other end, I did the same thing. I colored it black. And I went to the belt sander and sort of rounded over this edge. That's the radius that we want to be zero. You can't get there, but to the extent that you do not get there, it's dull. Sharpening is defined as abrading away metal and leaving a rather coarse set of grooves cut in by the particles on the sharpening media. And then those grooves are refined to finer and finer and finer grooves with more fine media. Sharpening is, for our purposes, generally categorized with three terms. The first one is grinding, and that's what you do with your coarsest grit. And you reach a point where you begin honing with finer grit. That's the only difference. Grinding is with coarse grit. At some point you go to honing with the finer grit, and at a third point you begin polishing. And polishing really means that it will show a reflection that neither of the other two will show. I need to stress this point. The more highly polished the surface, the sharper it is, and the longer it'll last. You don't need to go there necessarily with a real high polish. Your edge will not last as long if you don't go there. How do I know when an edge is sharp? What's it look like? Pick up the edge and look at it. Run your finger over the edge, no flesh, just your fingernail, like so. And if there's a nick in it, your thumbnail will pick it up. Now be careful, you can cut yourself doing this, so be very careful when you do it. If there's a nick in it, you may want to get it out, depending on what you're using the tool for. You may not need to. The process of sharpening rolls a burr over this way on the back edge. You need to be sure it's gone, and we're going to go over how to do that. And thirdly, I want the edges polished. And those three steps are just examining the edge. Now hold the edge up to a good light. I'm looking straight at the edge. I'm going to look down on it. If you do this and you actually see the edge, it's not sharp. It's rounded over somewhat. If you can see the edge, you do not have an acceptable edge. The last test is test it and see if it's sharp. This is sharp. When should I resharpen? That kind of depends on what you're going to do with the tool. If I'm using carving gouges like these, they need to be extremely sharp all the time. The other extreme, I guess, would be a mortise chisel. It's used for heavy chopping. It doesn't need to be as sharp as the carving tools. It needs to be sharp enough to do its job, not nearly so sharp as the carving tools, I guess the best way to say it. Another way to look at resharpening and timing of it is this. You need to learn to sharpen tools, your tools, and you need to do it frequently. You're better off keeping them sharp than letting them get dull and then trying to sharpen them. And when you develop a process, especially when you do it a lot, you're going to learn right when you take it right off the stones and move to the work. You'll get a sense of what it feels like with the wood, actual wood you're working on. And you'll remember that over a period of time. Then you will know when it's time to resharpen. You just learn it. Also, when you're working, say, with a carving tool and it begins to tear, either you're going against the grain where you shouldn't be, or your tool's dull. That's another way to tell. It needs sharpening. Another subject that comes up is flattening the back. But a chisel needs to be flat on the back. A cheap one likely is not flat, and you need to flatten it. But once you do that, you'll never have to do it again. You don't need to polish the whole back. If you notice this one, I'm going to turn this so that hopefully the camera will pick up the reflection. It's only polished down in here. I don't need to polish it up here. Now when I wear the chisel down, repeated sharpening is just going to get shorter and shorter. Then I need to move this line up. But generally speaking, half an inch or so is all that needs to be polished.
Are there times when you're paring with a chisel and find it digging into the grain and you realize that it's doing that because you're going against the grain? Is that chisel still sharp?
It can be, depending on it's up to the grain. Going against the grain can be extreme or it can be slight. If you think it might be the chisel, take it out and cut some paper with it, whatever, shave hair off your arms, whatever your method is. It can be the chisel. It may have nothing to do with the sharpness of the chisel.
What do you do in the case of where the chisel cannot cut the wood going against the grain?
Well, it'll cut it, but it'll also tear it. So if you put enough force behind it, it will cut it. Now, it may destroy your project, but you can cut it. The chisel will cut if it's sharp. If you can get access. Now, if you're going into a half-blind dovetail, you don't have a lot of leeway to move over here and attack from another angle. The first step in the sharpening process is we call a primary grind. It goes from the back to the front. And again, it's with the coarsest of your grits. Now this can be done by hand on some kind of media, can be done on a bench grinder. You're going to get a hollow grind like this. This would be a flat grind. This would be a hollow grind. Now what's the difference? Well, obviously this was made by a wheel. It can be motorized, it can be hand powered. This can be motorized or hand powered. The only difference practically is that out here on the working end of this thing, it's thinner right here between my fingernails than the same section is on this one. So this one is a little weaker. There's less metal to support that edge out there. Now, practically speaking, that doesn't make a lot of difference to us, except maybe with a beast like this, because you're going to be using it where you're actually pulling it, chipping back. And you need beef behind the edge to hold it.
Then why would you do a hollow grind? But the advantage of a hollow grind is quicker grind.
It depends, and I'm going to show you a way I do all of mine flat grinding, and I'll show you why, because I've got a mechanical tool that does it, a powered tool that does it very well. I need to mention when you're using a bench grinder, they usually come with a gray stone, and you can upgrade to a white stone, which either one of them can explode and really do damage to you and anything else it hits. I mentioned earlier that the process of honing and polishing leaves a burr on the edge of the tool on the backside. The burr must be removed, and you do that simply by dragging the flat tool, in this case plane blade, on your stone like so. Do it on a piece of leather. Some people do it on their blue jeans. Always pulled, never pushed.
Jim, is a burr necessary to get a sharp blade?
It is necessary because it tells a story. It tells that your honing and polishing has reached the edge. That's when you know to stop. You're going through the motion of honing and polishing. If it doesn't turn a burr, your work has not reached the edge yet. You need to keep going until you can feel a burr. You can do it with your fingernail like so. When you get there, it's time to stop. Anything beyond when that burr appears is a waste of time. But you need to turn it over and then take the burr off. Now, a little bit about edge geometry. The high-end tools will come usually with a 25-degree primary grind on most chisels and plane irons. And I stick with that. It's not important at all. It's a goal. If you miss it an inch, a degree and a half or two, it's not. Don't worry about it. The key is consistency, not accuracy, in terms of repeating that, whatever that number is. And I'll show you how I do that so that I get back to where it was last time. This tool has never been used, and I'm pretty sure that's a 25-degree. Now this is 30 degrees. Now here is a bench chisel, and it's closer to 27 degrees. Somewhere in that range, it make a lot of difference, really. What matters is when you sharpen the third and the fourth and the fifth time, you want to go back to what it was before, whether it's 26, 25, 24, 29, whatever it is. Go back there, because sharpening, if you keep changing angles, you're wasting a lot of time and grinding away a lot of metal that you don't necessarily need to remove. We have a primary bevel, which, as I pointed out before, is this side of the blade to this side of the blade. That's the primary bevel, and it's done with that's the initial grinding. Do this on every grit I had. But in doing so, I'd be eventually polishing this entire surface. That's not necessary. It's a lot of work that you don't need to go through. The alternative is a micro bevel. Now, a micro bevel would be this. By the way, micro bevel and secondary bevel, same thing, different term. If this is the angle of the primary bevel, if I raise it up just a little bit like so, I'm going to put a little bevel right here that's, in this case, maybe 10% of this width will be a secondary bevel. And I've shown that right here in exaggerated form. The black is the primary bevel. In this case, I raised it way up so you could see it. I colored the secondary bevel red, the primary bevel black. Now in practice, this red would be only this wide, because that's all you need. When the shaving comes up, it hits whatever surface it hits first, and it's going to roll. That's true with a chisel or plane iron. So it only needs to be so much. But picture this. If I take this nice, relatively sharp primary bevel, and I cut a very fine secondary bevel here, and then next week I cut another one because that one gets dull. Every time I resharpen, that primary bevel is going to grow. So this line here between the red and the black, the line between the primary and the secondary bevel, is going to creep from here up to here, and it'll eventually get all the way to here. Well, you don't want to let it go that far. The tweaking, the resharpening, sometimes called refreshing an edge, every time you do it, you're going to work on that secondary bevel, and it's going to get wider and wider and wider. And if you didn't do something about it, it would grow all the way to here. And again, the reason for this secondary bevel is to minimize the surface that you're trying to polish, which takes less time. So what do you do when it grows back here? Well, one thing you can do is put in a tertiary bevel, which is a third bevel, which would be, I don't have one to show, but it'd be a little bit steeper than this. You'd have a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary bevel. Having said that, at some time you're going to reach the point where you got to go back and do a new primary bevel. So just go back to your bench grinder or whatever your medium is and start all over. And that applies whether you're doing hollow grind or a flat grind. The next time you can change from hollow to flat or vice versa. I want to show you what a back bevel is. This goes in a bevel down plane. It's going to work like so. This surface is 45 degrees to the board you're working on, because that's what the frog is in the plane. If I'm planing real gnarly figured wood, this may cause tear out. Push this blade up steeper and steeper and steeper. It becomes, instead of planing, which would be down here, we get up here and we start to scrape. Scraping does not cause tear out. By putting a bevel on the back side of this, I can effectively turn this into a scraper or change this angle. Now, how do I do that? I can put this on my stone. The angle I get off there is 12 degrees. Change that projection, you change the angle. How do I know it's 12 degrees? Well, I take my Wixie Digital, put it on here, read the degrees, take the ruler, measure the projection, write it down. What I have over here is a list I made several years ago. Any angle I want, what's the projection? You can do this with building a little jig with little wooden stops. That works just fine. I just like to do it this way. I don't have room to make a jig with 30 different wooden blocks on it. Just so nobody's confused here. This is a bevel up plane. What it is a large block plane. This is what's known as a bench plane, which is a bevel down plane. This frog establishes the angle at which the iron intersects the wood at 45 degrees. The bevel is down, so this surface here is where the edge is, right on the bottom end of this surface right here. Now, if I want to use this plane on very gnarly wood, I need to raise this up like so, and one way of doing that is putting a back bevel on this bench plane, this bevel down plane. But putting a back bevel on this plane would not help, because the back bevel would go on the underside of this plane iron. It's not even in the picture. When the chip is sliced off there, it's going to come up away from where that back bevel is. The micro bevel is a different story. Your primary bevel, your secondary bevel, or micro, whichever you choose to call it, and a tertiary bevel if you ever choose to go there, they work just fine on both planes and chisels. The only thing that works only on a plane blade is when the plane is a beveled down plane. And you only need it when you're planing difficult to work woods, which is not very often. I wouldn't, you're laying it down on the bench, but the cutting surface is up just a little bit. In order to get that sharp edge down there where you really want to cut, you'd have to raise the handle just a little bit. So no, do not put a back bevel on a chisel. Binding, as I mentioned, creates a burr, which needs to be taken off. To simplify that process, a guy from England named David Charlesworth, he developed what he called the ruler trick. This surface here is just like I want it. There's a burr on the back. Take this ruler and put it right here. Lay your iron across like so, draw it this way, and just pull it on and off the stone as you go across like so. Don't come back this way more than half an inch, less if you can. The further back you go, the steeper this thing's going to be. Theoretically, we're creating a back bevel, but the back bevel I showed you before when I used the jig to get it, that's in the neighborhood of 10, 12 degrees, whatever you want to put on it. I measured the thickness of this with a micrometer, calculated the angle on this stone with this ruler. You know, it's less than 1/2 of 1 degree. It is a back bevel, but it is an inconsequential back bevel. They say don't use it on chisels, but that's being a purist. I don't hesitate to use it on a chisel, but it works great on a plane iron because you're only working on less than 1 millimeter of the surface, maybe 1/2 millimeter. You're going to hear the term. I use it. You might dig into your stone if you do that. You need to be careful you don't dig whether you're doing this or this. See, I'm moving back and forth this way as I'm going this way. The stone needs to be flat, no matter how you do it. Whether you do it like this, do the whole surface, or the ruler trick, the stone needs to be flat. Last month when you were here, I failed to mention 2 of my primary rules. The first is, when you're here, I want you to wear safety glasses. And the second thing is, never put a trash can under the edge of your workbench. I've lost a lot of tools that way. The subject of...
That wasn't in the script?
Well, no, it wasn't in the script. I don't take any credit for it. I've never had an original thought in my life.